in motion, is being collected. We have to be ready in case the answer to that question is yes, booster doses are needed. We don't know if that's what the answer is going to be, but we definitely don't want to be in a position from a worldwide perspective that if it's possible that's the answer, that we're starting flat-footed and only then communicating to the manufacturers that we need more doses produced. Doses can't be produced in an ever-increasing number of doses in a very short time frame. So the other stream of work is to be estimating how much supply would be needed if the answer is that booster doses are needed, either for people who are at most risk of disease. For instance, perhaps booster doses might be necessary only for older adults and those with underlying conditions. Perhaps for younger people, the intensity and duration of immunity would be stronger and longer. So those are some of the issues that we'll be looking at scientifically, but at the same time, we want to make sure that those investments have been made with the manufacturers and an option to buy those doses should they be necessary. So we're working in two streams here of both the evidence and trying to figure out when we would know and when those investments would have to be made with an option to procure the vaccines.
I think that's something people might not realize, that a lot of work goes on. I mean, most of the work goes on behind the scenes, but there's a lot of work that we don't necessarily talk about. It's not terribly interesting, but even for the rollout of these vaccines, we were working with countries ahead of time to say, this is what might be coming. This is how you probably should prepare. Is your regulatory body ready to approve new vaccines and so on? So that's a lot of what WHO's job is to help countries prepare ahead of time. I want to clarify something as well, and I know this came up at the press conference a couple of weeks ago. For those of you who are interested, you can always watch our press conferences. They're streamed on Twitter and YouTube and so on. People are a little bit confused because when we use language like emergency use listing, it sounds like this is an emergency vaccine, or this is a temporary vaccine, or perhaps still experimental vaccines. So can you just explain what kind of process? I mean, it could take a long time, but just quickly explain the status of these vaccines that WHO has emergency use listed, and just clarify that these are not experimental vaccines at this stage.
Sure. So experimental vaccines are vaccines that have not yet had sufficient evidence to make a recommendation and to authorize their use. The vaccines that we're talking about in the countries around the world and for WHO have this term. It's either emergency use authorization or emergency use listing. And the intent of this was to allow for vaccines that have demonstrated that they are safe, that they are immunogenic, and that they are effective against preventing disease, which is the whole intention of a vaccine. Those are the pieces of evidence that have to be available, along with the quality of manufacturing, in order to be authorized for use by a regulatory authority in the country. An example of that would be for the Europeans. They've come together and they use the European Medicines Agency. In the US, it's the FDA. So there are regulators in every country. And those regulators require this level of evidence in order to authorize that the vaccines can be used outside of experimental use. What these vaccines haven't had is they haven't had long-term use. And we know that. This is what an emergence listing is there is an emergency, and we don't have the luxury of long-term use in clinical trials before deciding that the benefit and the risk of using them is far outweighed on the side of the benefit. So that's what emergency use listing is. It does all of these vaccines that have been WHO, meeting the WHO emergency use listing criteria. They've all had extensive safety evaluations done. They've all demonstrated that they prevent disease to the magnitude that was established before the clinical trials started about what would be a meaningful public health benefit and individual benefit. and they've all been evaluated for the quality of their manufacturing. And so more data is collected over time, every day, on these vaccines. And that's one of the requirements of the manufacturers, is that they continue to carefully collect information so that these vaccines have the longer term information and will receive a full authorization and not be categorized in emergency use listed anymore, but would be categorized as being registered. So that's the difference between the two. But I really want to emphasize that no corners have been cut here. It really has to do with the volume of data and the duration of the data.
And just to clarify, as we said off the beginning, no vaccine is 100% effective, but these ones are incredibly effective. The ones we have approved have been in the 94, 95% effectiveness. So that's a very effective vaccine. I have a bit of an odd question, and we didn't chat about this ahead of time, so I hope you're ready for this one. There's a myth. I feel comfortable saying that this is a myth, but you can clarify it. That people who are vaccinated become magnetic, that their arm is magnetic, and you could attract metal to your arm. Does that sound plausible?
So there are a lot of pieces of information out in social media and otherwise, and this is one of those pieces of information that is not it's not accurate. It's not true. There isn't magnetism related to receiving a vaccine. The vaccines, the components that are in a vaccine are predominantly this component that I talked about, which is a small part of the pathogen that we're trying to expose your natural immune system to. And there are other components in vaccines, and depending on which platform it is, those different components vary. But no, there's no truth to that statement that there is a sort of induction of magnetism as a result of becoming vaccinated. It's not an accurate reflection of the vaccines.
Thanks for that. We say often, our Director General says often, that sharing vaccines, ensuring workers, the older people with unknowns in all countries in the world are protected, so that the global group of vulnerable people are protected. We say that that's the morally right thing to do, but we also say that it's the right thing to do in order to slow down and move us towards ending the pandemic. So can you explain that side of things? What's in it for me, essentially? Why should I care if somebody on the other side of the globe is vaccinated?
Yeah, this pandemic is not going to end as long as there is high transmission going on in substantial parts of the world. And I think the example that we can give here is around countries that have had substantial vaccination, and some of the variants of concern. I mentioned before that the variants are each more highly transmissible than the non-variants. And what we've seen is that some countries are backsliding in terms of the number of cases that they have, in part resulting the variants of concern, which are more transmissible than the non-variants. And where do the variants of concern come from? Well, there are mutations that happen in these viruses all the time. That's not news. So it's not just coronaviruses. All viruses have that occur over time. The point is not that mutations are in. The point is that when there's a lot of transmission happening from person to person, transmission is in part of not yet having full vaccination of the most at-risk people, and broad vaccination, especially in the adult parts of the population. It's like taking shots on goal. The more shots on goal you have, the more likely you are to score. The more transmission there is, the more the chance that one of those mutations is going to be a mutation that gives the virus a better chance at survival. And so that's why there can be the emergence of variants that are more highly transmissible. It gives that particular virus a running chance to outcompete other strains of the virus. So this is one of the most important reasons why when we say no country is safe until every country is safe, is that transmission is going to continue unless we have broad vaccination coverage in every country. And while transmission is ongoing in many countries, those variants are spreading across all countries in the world, even in those substantial vaccination already. So that's the reason why it's just not going to work if some countries are going very fast and other countries are lagging behind. It's actually putting all countries at risk.
The more the viruses are able to move around amongst us, the more those natural changes, it's natural for the virus to change, the more those natural changes continue, and the ones that change to be more transmissible transmit more. It's sort of logical in a way. We're about to wrap up, but I just wanted to hear you one more time on this question, because it remains confusing for people. Is it still possible to catch the disease after being vaccinated? And if you could put in there some of the statistics we're seeing, because we are seeing some encouraging statistics come back in countries, even ones where they've seen cases going up. There's actually some good news there. So just one more time on that one, please.
Yeah, it's such an important point. So I'm happy to kind of go over it again. The vaccines that are in use, especially the vaccines that are WHO emergency use listed, which are the ones that we can speak about, they are performing based on clinical trials at a level of preventing 80 to 95% of the serious disease, hospitalizations, and deaths. And I'm using some round numbers here. So in the 80%, in the 90%. That's a great number, but it's not 100%. And so it is possible, although very unlikely, that if you are fully vaccinated, it's possible that you can still get disease. But again, I want to emphasize, it is much less likely for you to get disease than if you weren't vaccinated. So the fact that we have some events, some people who are fully vaccinated and nevertheless have unfortunately developed COVID, that's not unexpected. In fact, that happens with all vaccines. There's no vaccine that is 100% protective. I wonder if I can just draw an analogy here. When you go out in a car, you put a seatbelt on. Seatbelts are highly effective at preventing a serious injury if you're in accident, but it's not 100% protect people who are in a serious car accident and in spite of wearing their seatbelt have a serious injury. That's not a reason not to wear your seatbelt. It's ever more important to wear your seatbelt because the likelihood that would happen if you were in a car accident is very low. So it's the same story. It's really important to get vaccinated because it gives you a huge amount of protection, but it's not 100%. So the fact that we're hearing about cases of people who were in fact fully vaccinated and happen to get disease is an unusual. It's a low risk that it will happen, but always known that happens, and it happens with all vaccines. So that isn't to lose confidence in the vaccines. We're watching very carefully at the numbers of those cases. And I'll give you one more way to think about this. As the number of people goes up that are vaccinated, when you look at the cases occur, the portion of those cases that will be people who are vaccinated is also going to go up. The number of cases of COVID is going to keep going down, but the fraction of those cases that are vaccinated will appear as a larger and larger number. And then you can think of this in the greatest extreme. If 100% of people were vaccinated, and yet the vaccine is not 100% protective, whatever cases do occur will be people who were vaccinated, but it will be an incredibly small number of cases. And that's what we're really aiming for. We want the fewest number of cases possible, because it is that fewest number of cases that allow us to stop using these other measures that we have, the masks, the hand washing, the physical distancing, the not gathering in large groups. That's what we all want to get back to, and we are going to get there. So what is most important right now is to, if you have access to vaccine, to go vaccinated, to continue using those other measures while those around you are getting vaccine. And we will get there together, and we'll be able to safely take off our masks, live a more normal life, and not have risk of our parents or ourselves or other loved ones to end up in hospital or to have serious disease, even more than being hospitalized. So we will get there, and we're tired of this, but it's really important that we continue to walk the path towards getting out of this acute pandemic.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien. And as you're saying, we're walking that path, and we're walking it together. So that's what will get us through to the end. Encouraging your friends and family to keep it up, even as you understand how frustrated and tired they are, because you yourself are as frustrated and tired. I'm just going to wrap up by listing the various countries and places that have been following us today. So you might hear your country: Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Zambia, Uganda, Germany, Indonesia, South Africa. On LinkedIn, we had Mali, Germany, Greece, Zambia, Egypt, Uganda, Turkey, Rwanda, USA, Pakistan, India, Kenya, South Africa, Portugal, Tunisia, Brazil, Morocco, UK, Nigeria, France, Zimbabwe. I'm almost done. Ethiopia, Mexico, Haiti, South Africa, Finland, Guinea, Poland, Ghana, Canada, Tanzania, Ireland, and Sierra Leone. Thank you very much for tuning in from wherever you are. Join us for next week, hopefully when we do the next live. Keep your eye on all our social media platforms for the various products we're putting out there. Let us know which ones you like. Let us know what's working. Let us know what questions you have. In fact, it's your questions that help us decide what topics we're going to do our various products on, and our social media events as well. So you really help us know what the questions are, what the needs are, so that we can answer them. So just wanted to thank you again, Dr. Kate O'Brien, our Director of the Department of Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals. Thanks for being with us. My name is Nika Alexander. I'm part of the Department of Communications here at WHO, headquarters here in Geneva, Switzerland. Thank you so much. Be safe. We're all in it together, and we'll get through it together. Bye-bye.